Hello, dreamers and wanderers. Welcome to a realm where the echoes of dragons still whisper through the trees and the moonlight dances with shadows. I'm Mooncat, your guide through tonight's adventure, a tale both haunting and serenely enchanting, designed to whisk you away on a journey of whispers and wonder. Tonight, we're venturing into the mysterious land of Valoria, a kingdom where dragons are but forgotten myths and their ghostly spirits linger like delicate echoes in the twilight. Imagine a world where ancient ruins breathe softly in the moonlight and enchanted forests hum with secrets of a bygone age. Our heroine, Princess Seraphine, finds herself cast out of her royal life and into a realm of spectral majesty and ghostly beauty. As we drift through this story, allow the soothing rhythms of the narrative to guide you into a dreamscape where every shadow holds a secret and every whisper is a lullaby. Join Seraphine as she navigates through eerie ruins and enchanted woods, with a sardonic dragon shaman at her side and the echoes of dragon roars guiding her path. Prepare for an evening filled with darkly whimsical encounters and serene, haunting beauty. So, make yourself comfortable. Let the gentle tones of this tale wash over you and surrender to the magic of the story that awaits. Let's begin our journey into the Dragon's Vale. The kingdom of Valoria had long since forgotten the roars of dragons, their once majestic wings now relegated to myth and whispered legend. The kingdom of Valoria lay like a half-forgotten dream, a place where time itself seemed to pause in reverence to the past. Its grandeur was a memory etched in stone and shadow, a fading echo of what once was. The palace, at the heart of this realm, stood like a spectral sentinel, its marble walls kissed by the chill of neglect. Once a beacon of splendor, the palace now bore the weight of ages, its once glorious facade cracked and worn, ivy crawling like dark veins over its surface. The air within its vast halls was heavy with the scent of dust and the lingering sighs of those long departed, the silence broken only by the occasional whisper of the wind through shattered windows. Beyond the palace's crumbling embrace, the land of Valoria unfolded like the pages of a forgotten tome, each chapter filled with mystery and melancholy. The ruins of echoed roars, where the last remnants of the dragon civilization lay in eternal slumber, stretched across the horizon, bathed in the eternal twilight that cloaked the kingdom. Here, statues of dragons, colossal and defiant, loomed like ancient gods, their faces frozen in expressions of both fury and sorrow. The ground beneath them was a tapestry of fractured stone and twisted metal, remnants of battles long past, now entwined with creeping vines and ghostly mist. The ruins were a labyrinth of broken dreams and shattered glory, where the sun never fully set, casting the land in an otherworldly glow that was neither day nor night. Shadows danced along the cracked walls, alive with the memories of 1,000 forgotten legends, while the air was thick with the scent of magic both sweet and bitter, a perfume of lost power and unfulfilled promises. Here the veil between the worlds was thin, and one could almost hear the echoes of dragon roars, carried on the wind like the mournful cries of lost souls. Surrounding these ruins was an ancient forest, its trees tall and twisted, their bark as dark as midnight. The leaves above formed a dense canopy, blotting out the sky, while beneath them, the forest floor was a mosaic of luminescent fungi and strange glowing flowers. The forest breathed with a life of its own, each rustle of the leaves a whispered secret, each flicker of light a reminder of the magic that still pulsed through the land. The paths through this enchanted wood were winding and treacherous, leading travelers in circles or to places they had no intention of finding, as if the forest itself was a living maze, a guardian of ancient secrets. At the edge of this wild, living world lay Eldervale, a town that clung to the remnants of dragon lore, like a child to a cherished, if fearsome story. Eldervale was a place of uneasy coexistence, where the warmth of fire-lit homes and the comfort of cobblestone streets were overshadowed by the looming presence of dragon statues and the ever-present mist that curled through the town like a living entity. The people of Eldervale lived in a state of quiet dread, their lives interwoven with the legends of the dragon's legends that were as much a part of their reality as the ground beneath their feet. To live in Eldervale was to walk a fine line between reverence and fear, between the safety of the familiar and the terror of the unknown. In Valoria, the sky was a constant swirl of colours, deep purples and blues that blended into the dusky horizon, where stars flickered faintly like dying embers in a forgotten hearth. The land itself seemed to mourn the loss of its dragons, yet within that mourning lay a sense of hope, a belief that the magic of old had not entirely faded, but lay waiting, hidden in the shadows, in the echoes of the past, in the heart of the one who dared to seek it out. Valoria was a kingdom on the edge of myth and memory, a place where the past was never truly gone, and the future was a whisper waiting to be heard. Amidst this world of fractured memories, Princess Seraphine lived in the marble halls of the palace, her heart heavy with a secret she could scarcely understand. She had always felt an inexplicable connection to the dragons of old, but it was a connection that brought only whispered rumours and wary glances. Seraphine, the Princess of Valoria, possessed an otherworldly beauty that seemed to draw from the moonlight itself. Her hair, a cascade of liquid silver, flowed down her back like a river of light, shifting and shimmering with every breath of wind. It was as though her tresses were spun from the very essence of the night, each strand imbued with a secret glow that hinted at some arcane power. Her eyes were a deep, stormy blue, the kind of blue that held the memory of distant oceans and forgotten skies. They were dark and fathomless pools of melancholy, where the weight of ancient secrets and unrealized dreams seemed to rest. When she looked at you, it was as if she was seeing not just your face, but your soul, her gaze both unsettling and mesmerizing. Seraphine's form was slender, almost ethereal, yet there was a strength in her bearing that defied her delicate appearance. She wore a gown of deep teal, the fabric clinging to her like a second skin, embroidered with intricate patterns that glinted like dragon scales in the half-light. The gown seemed almost alive, shifting subtly with her movements, as if it had a will of its own, woven from threads of twilight and mystery. Over her gown, she draped a cloak of midnight blue, the hood often drawn low over her face, casting her features in shadow. The edges of the cloak were adorned with tiny, silver dragon motifs, each one so finely wrought that they seemed to flutter and breathe in the dim light, a silent chorus of ancient guardians. The cloak billowed behind her like a piece of the night sky, trailing stars and darkness in her wake. Her face was a study in contrasts, sharp and soft, human and something other. High cheekbones and a delicate jaw framed a mouth that was often set in a slight, enigmatic smile, as if she knew secrets the world had yet to uncover. A simple silver circlet rested on her brow, understated yet impossibly regal, holding a single gemstone at its center that pulsed with a soft, inner light, an ember of the past glowing with the power of forgotten ages. Her hands, delicate and pale, bore the marks of ancient magic glowing runes that seemed to shift and dance across her skin, changing form with each thought and emotion. These marks were not merely adornments but living symbols, imbued with the power of the dragons themselves. a testament to the connection she could scarcely comprehend. Seraphine moved through the world like a shadow, silent and swift, her presence both a comfort and a curse. She was a living paradox, a princess of a fading kingdom, and the last hope of a dying magic, her destiny intertwined with the ancient dragons she could never fully understand, yet was bound to by blood and fate. When her father, King Thorn, decreed her exile, it was not with the grandeur of royal banishment, but with the cold efficiency of a dismissed servant. She was cast out into the realm of ghostly dragon ruins, a land as enchanting as it was eerie. As Seraphine stood at the edge of the palace grounds, the world beyond seemed to shimmer with an unsettling blend of mystery and beauty. King Thorn, the ruler of the fading kingdom of Valoria, had always been a man bound by the chains of tradition and the weight of a legacy that hung like a noose around his neck. In the twilight of his reign, when the last remnants of dragon magic had all but vanished, leaving only shadows and echoes in their wake, he found himself confronted by a daughter who was as much a part of that dying magic as the land itself. Princess Seraphine, with her moonlit hair and eyes that bore the weight of forgotten oceans, was a living reminder of a past that Thorn could neither reclaim nor fully comprehend. Her very presence in the palace halls, with her delicate hands marked by runes that glowed with an ancient power, was a silent accusation, a living rebuke to all he had failed to protect and preserve. She was a daughter of dragons, a being born of a dying world, and her connection to the creatures that had once soared above Valoria was a bond that the king feared, even as he failed to understand it. In the eyes of King Thorn, Seraphine was both a threat and a sorrow, a living embodiment of the magic that had slipped through his fingers, leaving him with nothing but the cold comfort of stone walls and the burden of a crown grown too heavy to bear. The people of Valoria, too, whispered of her strangeness, her beauty that was too otherworldly, too touched by the moonlight and the mysteries of the old world. To them, she was a creature of legend, a princess who belonged to a realm of dragons and twilight, not to the crumbling reality of a kingdom on the brink of oblivion. When King Thorn decreed Seraphine's exile, it was not with the righteous fury of a monarch betrayed, but with the quiet desperation of a man who sought to sever the ties to a past that haunted him. In casting her out, he believed he could protect what little remained of his kingdom, could stave off the inevitable collapse of a world built on the bones of dragons and the dreams of men. Yet deep within his heart, Thorn knew the truth. Seraphine was not the cause of Valoria's decay, but its last fragile hope, a beacon of the magic he had long forsaken. And so, with the cold efficiency of one who has long since abandoned hope, King Thorn banished his daughter, sending her into the wild, twilight world beyond the palace, a land where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, and where the echoes of dragon roars still lingered like a mournful dirge. He did not do so out of malice, but out of fear, the fear of a man who had lost his way in the shadows of his own failures, and who could not bear to look upon the light that still burned, however faintly, in the eyes of his only child. In the end, Thorn's decision was not the act of a king, but of a father who could not reconcile the daughter he loved with the destiny she was bound to. And so Seraphine was cast out into a world where dragons once reigned, her path guided by the enigmatic shaman Zephyr, her fate entwined with the magic that her father had sought to forget, but which she could never escape. Her new guide, a dragon shaman named Zephyr, was as sardonic as he was enigmatic. Zephyr was a creature of shadow and moonlight, a remnant of a time when dragons ruled the skies and their magic wove through the world like a living thread. His form was insubstantial, as if he were made of mist and dreams, a phantom who drifted through the twilight with the lazy grace of one who no longer belonged to the realm of the living. His body, slender and serpentine, was cloaked in scales that shimmered like quicksilver, each one catching the faintest light and turning it into a pale, ghostly glow. These scales were not solid, but seemed to flicker between reality and illusion, a reminder that Zephyr was more spirit than flesh, a wisp of what once was. His face was sharp, angular, carved from the same twilight that birthed him. High cheekbones and a narrow jaw gave him an air of both elegance and danger, as if he were a creature who had seen the rise and fall of empires and found them all wanting. His eyes were his most striking feature, twin orbs of shifting colour, icy blue one moment, deep indigo the next. They gleamed with a hidden amusement, as though Zephyr found the world and all its struggles a darkly humorous play staged for his own entertainment. Yet behind that amusement lay a deep well of knowledge, the kind that comes only with centuries of existence, a wisdom as old as the dragons themselves. Zephyr's wings, though tattered and ghostly, were still a sight to behold. Once majestic, they now hung like ragged banners, their edges frayed and worn, as if the winds of time had torn them apart. And yet, even in their ruin, they retained a certain grandeur, a memory of the skies they once commanded. The wings shimmered faintly, catching the light in such a way that they seemed almost transparent, a delicate lattice of bones and sinew that held the essence of flight long forgotten. He wore a robe of shadow, a garment that flowed around him like liquid smoke, its edges trailing off into nothingness. The robe was adorned with ancient runes, symbols that pulsed with a faint, ghostly light, marking him as a keeper of secrets, a being who held the keys to knowledge long buried. These runes, ever changing, seemed to whisper as they moved, as if they were alive with the memories of a lost age. Zephyr's presence was a blend of unsettling and comforting, a paradox that reflected his nature. He moved with the languid ease of one who has no need to hurry, a being outside the bounds of time. His voice, when he chose to use it, was soft and whispery, carrying with it the weight of ancient truths and dark humour, each word laced with a subtle irony that could both soothe and unsettle. He spoke in riddles and half-truths, his tone always tinged with that faint smirk, as if he were in on a cosmic joke that no one else could understand. In his presence, the world seemed to shift and blur, the line between reality and dream fading into nothing. Zephyr was a creature of paradoxes, both ancient and ageless, playful and profound, a ghost of the past and a harbinger of what was yet to come. He was the last breath of dragon magic, a whisper on the wind, carrying with him the weight of a forgotten era and the promise of secrets waiting to be unearthed. Zephyr, the ghostly shaman of a time long past, did not accompany Princess Seraphine out of mere obligation or chance, but because the currents of destiny had woven their fates together in a tapestry of ancient magic and forgotten lore. His form, insubstantial as mist and shadow, was a spectre from the era when dragons ruled the skies and their magic sang in the bones of the earth. Now he lingered in the twilight, a guardian of secrets too heavy for any mortal soul to bear alone. In Seraphine, Zephyr saw more than just a princess exiled from a crumbling kingdom. He saw the last ember of the dragon's flame, flickering weakly in the darkness of a world that had all but forgotten its light. He became her guide, leading her through the labyrinth of ruins and echoes, where the veil between life and death was thin as a whisper. His knowledge of hidden paths, of ancient sigils carved into stone and bone, was a map only he could decipher, a map that would lead Seraphine to the heart of her own destiny. But Zephyr was more than a guide, he was the keeper of the dragon's secrets, the last custodian of their lost wisdom. In his spectral heart, he carried the weight of untold truths, each one a key to the mysteries that Seraphine would need to unlock if she was to grasp the full measure of her power. He whispered to her in riddles and half-truths, his words curling through the air like tendrils of smoke, offering glimpses of the magic that still pulsed faintly in the depths of Valoria. Yet there was something deeper still, a shadow of sorrow that clung to Zephyr like the remnants of a storm. He was a creature bound by the chains of the past, haunted by the memories of his fallen kin, by the songs of dragons now silenced. In Seraphine he sought a form of redemption, a chance to right the wrongs of an age that had slipped through his grasp like sand. Traveling with her, he was not just a mentor, but a penitent, hoping that through her he might find peace for the restless spirits that still roamed the ruins. And then there was fate, the unseen hand that guided them both, drawing their paths together with the inevitability of a prophecy long ago spoken. Zephyr felt it in his very essence, that pull towards Seraphine, not as a choice but as a necessity. The magic that tied them together was old, older than the kingdom itself, a bond forged in the fires of the dragon's breath. He was bound to her as surely as the night is bound to the day, their destinies intertwined in a dance that neither could escape. Thus, Zephyr travelled with Seraphine, not out of duty, but because he was as much a part of her journey as she was of his. Together, they moved through a world where the echoes of the past still whispered in the wind, where the flicker of dragon magic could still be felt in the air, a fragile thread of hope that connected them to what had been, and what might yet be. His presence was a constant reminder that Seraphine's quest was as much about finding herself as it was about discovering her destiny. As Seraphine and Zephyr journeyed through the enchanted forests and desolate dragon ruins, the landscape unfolded like a haunting dream. The ruins were cloaked in a perpetual twilight, where the trees seemed to whisper forgotten tales, and the air was thick with the scent of ancient magic. Crumbling statues of dragons, their faces frozen in regal defiance, loomed over them like silent sentinels. Seraphine and Zephyr journeyed to Eldervale, as though drawn by the invisible threads of fate, each step taking them deeper into a world where the past and present intertwined in a dance of shadows and half-remembered dreams. The path they followed was not one of logic or clear intention, but of instinct and the unspoken pull of destiny. Eldervale, with its peculiar blend of reverence and dread, lay at the edge of the ruins where dragon bones slept beneath the earth, and the air itself hummed with the remnants of ancient power. It was here, in this twilight place, that they hoped to find answers buried within the whispers of the past. The journey to Eldervale was not measured in days or hours, but in the rhythm of the land itself. Time seemed to stretch and contract as they passed through the enchanted forest, where the trees murmured secrets in a language only the wind could understand. The twilight sky, neither day nor night, cast an otherworldly glow upon the crumbling statues of dragons that watched over them with silent, unblinking eyes. It might have been days or perhaps weeks before the town's crooked spires and mist-shrouded streets came into view, a place that existed on the cusp of reality, where the boundary between what was and what could be was as thin as a breath. In Eldervale, they found not a refuge but a mirror of their own uncertain journey. The townsfolk, their faces lined with the weight of old fears and unspoken hopes, eyed Seraphine with a mixture of awe and trepidation. She was a living echo of the dragons they both revered and feared, a figure out of legend who had stepped into their midst, bringing with her the possibility of change that they were not sure they were ready to embrace. The town of Eldervale, nestled at the edge of these ruins, was a peculiar place. Its inhabitants, though living in constant reverence of the dragon's legacy, were as fearful of their return as they were awed by their past grandeur. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously as Seraphine passed through. They treated the princess as a curiosity, half-remembered legend, and a potential harbinger of change. It was in a dimly lit corner of the local inn that they encountered Borin, the town's storyteller, whose grizzled visage bore the marks of a life spent on the border of myth and reality. Borin's tales were spun with a careless charm, as though he balanced on the knife edge between truth and fancy, letting his listeners decide which was which. He spoke of the dragons as if he had known them personally, his words weaving images of ghostly apparitions that roamed the ruins and enchanted relics that lay hidden beneath the earth, waiting to be found by those with the courage or the folly to seek them. Seraphine's first encounter in Eldervale was with a grizzled old storyteller named Borin, who spun tales of dragon lore with an air of bemused detachment. His stories were both haunting and whimsical, filled with ghostly apparitions and enchanted relics that seemed to blur the line between reality and fable. Borin's irreverent humour provided a strange comfort amidst the foreboding atmosphere. Borin told them of a place beyond Eldervale, deeper into the ruins where the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, and where the last breath of dragon magic still lingered, trapped in the echoes of a forgotten age. It was a place of both promise and peril, where the path forward was as likely to lead to destruction as to salvation. He spoke of the Shattered Peak, a mountain said to be the resting place of the last great dragon, whose heart still beat with the fire of ages past, a beacon to those who sought the truth of their own destinies. Guided by Borin's words and the faint pulse of magic that seemed to resonate within Seraphine's very soul, they knew where they must go. The Shattered Peak called to them, its ancient power a siren song that promised answers, though it did not promise safety. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but Seraphine and Zephyr were drawn to it not by choice, but by the inescapable pull of fate, a force that neither of them could deny, and that neither of them fully understood. As they left Eldervale behind, the town's mist and shadows clinging to their backs like a second skin, they moved forward into the unknown, driven by a destiny that was as much a part of them as the blood in their veins. Seraphine and Zephyr walked through the heart of the enchanted forest, where the air shimmered with a magic older than memory. The trees towered above them, their bark a deep, velvety black, while their leaves glowed with a soft, silvery light that cast shifting patterns on the forest floor. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of blooming nightshade and the faint, metallic tang of ancient magic. Spectral creatures moved in the periphery of their vision, flickering in and out of existence, like the memories of dreams. They were delicate, ethereal beings, part animal, part spirit, whose forms seemed to be woven from moonlight and mist. Their eyes, glowing faintly, followed Seraphine's every movement with a curiosity that was both gentle and unsettling. It was in this place, where reality itself seemed to waver and bend, that Seraphine stumbled upon the broken egg. Its fragments lay scattered across a bed of luminescent moss, each shard gleaming with the faint light of runes etched into the shell, symbols of an ancient and forgotten prophecy. The egg, once a vessel of life, now lay in ruin, its purpose unfulfilled, and the sight of it struck both Seraphine and Zephyr like a dagger to the heart. A sharp pang of pain blossomed in Seraphine's chest, a sensation so sudden and intense that it nearly stole her breath away. She knelt beside the shattered remnants, her fingers trembling as she traced the glowing runes, feeling the cold, smooth surface of the shell. The pain turned to sadness, a deep, soul-wrenching grief that welled up within her, filling the hollow places in her heart that she had not known existed. It was as though the loss of the egg echoed a loss within herself, a part of her that had been broken long before she had ever set foot in this forest. But the sadness did not linger alone. It was soon joined by anger, a fierce, burning rage that flared up from the depths of her soul. Who would do such a thing? Who would destroy something so precious, so filled with potential? Who would do this, she asked, her voice a whisper, trembling with barely contained fury. She looked up at Zephyr, her stormy blue eyes searching his face for answers. Zephyr, usually so calm, so unreadable, stood motionless, his form almost blending into the shadows that clung to the trees. His eyes, those ever-shifting orbs of icy blue and deep indigo, were dark with emotion. For a moment, the stoic mask he wore so well seemed to crack, and Seraphine glimpsed the raw pain and sorrow that he kept buried beneath his sardonic exterior. It was a fleeting glimpse, but it was enough to show her that Zephyr was not as untouched by the world as he appeared. He, too, felt the weight of the broken egg and the anguish that came with it. "I do not know," Zephyr finally answered, his voice quieter than usual, as if the weight of his emotions was too much to bear. He looked away, his gaze distant, as though he were seeing something far beyond the forest, something lost in the mists of time. It was clear to Seraphine that Zephyr was struggling to maintain his composure, to stay strong for her sake. The pain etched into his features, the way his voice trembled ever so slightly, all spoke of a deep, unspoken grief. He was trying to hide it, to shield her from the full extent of his sorrow, but she could see it, feel it echoing in the silence between them. "Zephyr," she said gently, rising to her feet and placing a hand on his arm. "How are you faring?" He looked at her then, his expression softening, though the sadness in his eyes remained. "I am as I always am, Seraphine," he replied, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But there was no humor in it, only a deep, weary resignation. "But this is a wound that time will not easily heal." Seraphine's heart ached at his words, but before she could speak again, the forest itself seemed to shift around them. The spectral creatures that had been watching them began to move, their forms gliding through the air like wisps of smoke. The phantom dragons, mere echoes of their former glory, stirred from their resting places among the trees, their translucent bodies shimmering with a faint, ethereal light, moved through the branches with the grace of spirits. These were the remnants of the dragons who had once roamed Valoria, their spirits lingering in the forest long after their physical forms had crumbled to dust. "Why do they remain here?" Zephyr Seraphine asked, her gaze following the movements of a particularly large phantom dragon whose eyes glowed with a sorrowful light. Why do their spirits still linger? Zephyr's eyes, dark and inscrutable, followed hers. They are bound to this place, to the magic that still thrums in the earth, he said quietly. They linger because their purpose was never fulfilled, because the world has forgotten them, but they cannot forget the world. They wait, hoping that one day their legacy will be reborn and their voices will be heard once more. As Zephyr spoke, Seraphine felt a subtle tug in her chest, a pull that led her deeper into the forest, away from the broken egg and towards something hidden just beyond her sight. Without a word, she followed the sensation, her feet moving of their own accord. Zephyr, sensing her intent, moved with her, silent and watchful. The forest opened up before them, revealing a hidden glen bathed in soft golden light. It was a place untouched by time, where the air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers and the soft hum of ancient magic. In the center of the glen, hovering just above the ground, was the spirit of a dragon. Its form was vast and majestic, yet insubstantial, like a dream-given shape. The dragon's eyes, pools of liquid amber, regarded Seraphine with a gaze that was both tender and knowing, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Welcome, Seraphine," the dragon spirit spoke, its voice a deep, resonant echo that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath her feet. "I have awaited your coming for many ages." Seraphine felt a shiver run down her spine as the dragon's words washed over her. You know who I am?" she asked, her voice small in the presence of such power. The dragon spirit nodded, its form rippling with the movement. "I know you, child of Valoria, descendant of the ancient line. You carry within you the blood of dragons, the legacy of a time when our kind ruled the skies and our magic shaped the world. You are the last of your kind, the one who will awaken the power that lies dormant in your veins and bring forth the rebirth of our world." Seraphine's heart pounded in her chest as the dragon's words sank in. Her lineage, her role, it was all connected to the dragons, to the magic that still lingered in the ruins and the forests of Valoria. She was not just a princess, she was a vessel of ancient power, a beacon of hope for a world that had forgotten its own strength. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. The dragon spirit's gaze softened, and it seemed to smile, though its form remained ethereal and distant. "You must seek the shattered peak, where the heart of our magic lies. There you will find the key to awakening your true power, and the path to your destiny will become clear. But beware, for the journey is fraught with peril, and the shadows of the past will seek to hinder your progress. Trust in your strengths, Seraphine, and in the bond you share with Zephyr. Together you can overcome the darkness and bring forth the dawn of a new age." As the dragon spirit's words faded into the stillness of the glen, Seraphine felt a renewed sense of purpose take root within her. The weight of her lineage, of her destiny, no longer felt like a burden, but a responsibility she was ready to embrace. She looked to Zephyr, who stood beside her with an expression of quiet resolve, and knew that they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The path to the shattered peak was not one they would walk alone, for the spirits of the dragons were with them, guiding them toward a future that was yet to be written. Seraphine's journey was not without its trials. As she ventured further, she faced trials that tested her resolve and challenged her perceptions. Darkly humorous encounters with mischievous forest spirits and enigmatic guardians forced her to confront her own fears and insecurities. Yet, amidst the trials, she found moments of profound clarity and peace, as if the realm itself was guiding her towards her destiny. Under a velvet sky littered with stars, Seraphine and Zephyr lay side by side, the crackling of their campfire the only sound that broke the profound silence of the enchanted forest. The night air was cool, tinged with the scent of blooming jasmine and the distant echo of a nightbird's call. Above them, the constellations shimmered like scattered jewels, casting a faint, silvery light over the forest floor. Seraphine broke the silence first, a playful smile tugging at her lips as she glanced at Zephyr. You know, you're surprisingly good company for a creature who could easily be mistaken for a statue. Zephyr, reclining with an air of practiced indifference, arched an eyebrow at her, a glint of amusement in his eyes. Statues don't have my wit, my dear, nor do they possess the fine art of sarcasm. Seraphine chuckled, shaking her head. True, though they might have less of a tendency to make cutting remarks at my expense. Ah, but where would be the fun in that? Zephyr countered, his voice laced with dry humour. Besides, if I didn't keep you on your toes, who would? She smiled, her gaze drifting back up to the stars. I suppose you're right. You've always had a way of making the unbearable slightly more bearable. Zephyr's expression softened, his eyes reflecting the starlight as he regarded her. And you, Seraphine, have always had a way of finding beauty in the most desolate places. For a moment, they were silent, the weight of the journey and the uncertainty of their future hanging between them like a dark cloud. Then, almost hesitantly, Seraphine asked Zephyr, "Why do you stay here? In this realm, where humans destroy everything they touch, wouldn't it be easier to leave, to find a place untouched by their greed and folly?" Zephyr's eyes grew distant, the flickering firelight casting shadows across his sharp features. It's true, humans have a knack for ruin. They build, they conquer, they destroy, it's their nature. But magic and dragons, we're not meant to last forever either. Our time is slipping away as it must. We've lived in this world far longer than most could comprehend, and perhaps it's time to let go. Seraphine was taken aback by his answer, her eyes widening. But you've fought so hard, all of you have. Isn't it worth continuing that fight? Zephyr's gaze met hers, filled with a wisdom that came from centuries of existence. Accepting our fate doesn't mean we haven't fought. We've waged battles, won and lost. But the truth is, Seraphine, everything has its time. Even the most powerful magic fades, even the fiercest dragons grow weary. It's not about surrendering, it's about understanding that we've lived our lives, fulfilled our purpose, and now it's time to pass the torch. It's the right thing to do, even if it's the hardest. Seraphine felt a lump form in her throat, struggling to grasp the depth of Zephyr's acceptance. The idea that such powerful beings could willingly step aside was both humbling and terrifying. I never thought of it that way. Zephyr smiled gently, his voice softening. You'll come to understand it, Seraphine, in time. As the fire died down and the night deepened, they drifted off to sleep side by side. Seraphine's dreams were filled with the warm light of the palace in Valoria. She saw her father's face, his expression filled with regret and sorrow. He welcomed her home with open arms, apologizing for banishing her, his voice heavy with remorse. She felt a surge of elation, a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. But as quickly as the dream had come, it twisted into a nightmare. The bright halls of the palace darkened, and she watched in horror as her father's army turned on Zephyr, their arrows piercing his wings. Zephyr cried out in pain, his eyes locking onto hers, filled with desperation and agony. Seraphine tried to run to him, to help, but she was frozen in place, powerless to save him. The last thing she saw was Zephyr's outstretched hand, reaching for her as he fell. Seraphine awoke with a start, tears streaming down her face. She looked over to Zephyr, who was still fast asleep, his breathing steady and calm. The dream had shaken her to the core, and sleep refused to return, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts until the dawn. The next day, as they ventured further into the forest, they encountered a band of mischievous sprites. The tiny, glowing creatures flitted about, giggling and chattering in their high-pitched voices. They took particular delight in causing chaos, blowing Seraphine's hood over her eyes, tripping her as she walked, and zapping Zephyr with tiny bolts of magic that made him twitch in irritation. Enough, Zephyr finally snapped, his patience wearing thin. With a flick of his claws, he singed the wings of one particularly bold sprite, sending the rest of them shrieking and scattering in all directions. Some collided with each other in their frantic escape, a spectacle that would have been comical if it weren't so infuriating. Perhaps you should have just breathed fire on them, Seraphine quipped, pulling her hood back into place. Zephyr smirked, tempting, but then we'd have a charred forest to navigate. The forest through which Seraphine and Zephyr journeyed was a place where the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended between light and shadow, dream and reality. Ancient trees, their trunks as gnarled and twisted as the tales of old, rose like titans from the earth, their bark etched with the passage of countless years. The canopy above was dense, a woven tapestry of leaves and branches that filtered the sunlight into a dappled mosaic of gold and emerald, casting fleeting patterns upon the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a perfume of life in constant decay and renewal. Every step they took was cushioned by a carpet of moss, soft and yielding, as though the forest itself sought to muffle their presence, to swallow them into its depths. The undergrowth was a tangled mass of brambles and ferns, their fronds brushing against Seraphine's legs like the fingers of unseen spirits, urging her to turn back, to abandon her quest. But the true heart of the forest lay in its silence, a silence so profound that it seemed to hum with an undercurrent of latent power. There were no birds singing, no animals scurrying through the underbrush. Only the occasional creak of a tree bending to the will of an unseen breeze, or the distant crackle of a dry branch breaking under its own weight, disturbed the stillness. It was as though the forest were holding its breath, waiting, watching, testing the intruders who dared walk its paths. And yet there was beauty here too, in the way the light caught on the dew-laden cobwebs strung between the branches like delicate lace, or in the rare patches of wildflowers that bloomed defiantly in the shadowed glades, their colours vivid against the sombre backdrop. The trees themselves were a marvel, their roots twisting and curling above the ground, forming natural arches and passageways, as though the forest were alive, shaping itself around those who walked within it. But beneath the beauty, there was an edge, a sharpness that whispered of danger. The shadows were too deep, the paths too winding, leading not to clearings but to darker places where the light could not reach. The forest was a living entity, ancient and untamed, and it tolerated the presence of Seraphine and Zephyr not with welcome, but with wary acceptance, as though it recognized their purpose but remained unconvinced of their worth. And as they ventured deeper, the trees grew closer, their branches intertwining, like the fingers of conspirators, blocking out more of the light, until they were walking in a twilight world where the line between reality and the other world began to blur. Strange shapes flitted at the edge of their vision, too quick to be seen clearly, yet always there a fleeting glimpse of something other, something not quite of this world. Zephyr, though outwardly calm, was ever watchful, his keen eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, his senses attuned to the forest's every shift. He knew that this was no ordinary wood, but a place steeped in magic, where the rules of the outside world held little sway. And Seraphine, though determined, could not shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the forest itself was a test, a living labyrinth designed to challenge her resolve at every turn. Here, in this place of ancient power and hidden dangers, every step was a choice, every breath a reminder of the peril that lay ahead. And as they pressed on deeper into the heart of the forest, Seraphine felt the weight of the journey settle upon her shoulders, knowing that this was only the beginning, that the forest had many secrets yet to reveal. Their journey took a more serious turn when they encountered an enigmatic guardian of the forest. The creature, a towering figure draped in a cloak of leaves and shadows, appeared before them in a clearing. Its voice was deep and resonant, echoing through the trees like the rustling of wind through the branches. Seraphine the Guardian intoned, "You must face a trial to prove your worth. Zephyr may not aid you. This test is yours alone, to prepare you for what lies ahead." Seraphine squared her shoulders, her heart pounding. The Guardian's presence was overwhelming, but she knew she could not back down. The trial was a test of her wit and candour, her ability to think on her feet. The guardian of the forest, a being as old as the earth itself, was a towering figure, its form cloaked in shadows and leaves that seemed to whisper secrets of ancient times. The air around it was thick with an otherworldly presence, a subtle hum of magic that pulsed with each breath the guardian took. Its eyes, glowing like embers in the dark, bore into Seraphine's soul, searching, judging, weighing the worth of the mortal who dared stand before it. Seraphine felt the gravity of the moment, her heart pounding as the guardian's voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the trees. "You seek passage through this forest," it said, the words like the rustling of leaves on the wind. "But to proceed, you must prove your worth. The trials ahead will test not only your strength, but your mind and spirit." The first trial was one of fear. The guardian summoned from the shadows a vision of Seraphine's deepest terror, a figure cloaked in darkness, with eyes like molten gold, a twisted version of her father, who had once banished her from the kingdom of Valoria. His voice, cold and cruel, accused her of treachery, of abandoning her people, of being unworthy of the magic that flowed in her veins. The spectre's words cut deep, and Seraphine felt her resolve waver, her confidence shaken by the haunting echoes of her past. But as the figure stepped closer, she forced herself to remember the lessons she had learned, the strength she had gained on her journey. Drawing upon the fire within her, she faced the spectre with unyielding defiance, dispelling it with a burst of light that radiated from her very core. The darkness receded, leaving only the guardian's approving gaze. The second trial tested her cunning. The guardian conjured a labyrinth of thorny vines and twisting paths, a maze that seemed to shift and change with each step she took. Seraphine's every move was mirrored by the forest, which sought to confuse and mislead her. It whispered false promises, luring her with the sweet scent of blooming flowers that led to dead ends, or the distant sound of water that was nothing more than a mirage. But Seraphine knew the forest's tricks. She focused not on the sights and sounds, but on the subtle shifts in the earth beneath her feet, the almost imperceptible tug of magic that guided her through the maze. Her wit and intuition led her to the heart of the labyrinth, where a single glowing blossom waited a symbol of her victory. The final trial was one of sacrifice. The guardian presented Seraphine with a choice, a path that led back to the life she had known, where she could reclaim her kingdom, her title, and the love of her people, or a path that led into the unknown, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but offering the chance to save more than just her kingdom. The second path would demand everything of her, perhaps even her life. Seraphine's heart ached with the weight of the decision. The first path was safe, familiar, but she knew it was an illusion, a trap laid by her own desires. The second path was terrifying, but it was the path of true courage, the path that would lead to a greater purpose. With a heavy heart, Seraphine chose the second path, her voice steady as she spoke the words aloud. "I choose the path of sacrifice, for only in giving can we truly find ourselves." The guardian's form seemed to soften, the shadows receding as it stepped aside, revealing the path forward. "You have chosen wisely, Seraphine," it said, its voice tinged with a rare hint of warmth. "The road ahead will be perilous, but you have the strength to walk it Go forth with the blessing of the forest. As Seraphine and Zephyr continued their journey, the trials lingered in her mind, not as burdens but as lessons. She had faced her fears, outwitted the forest, and chosen the path of sacrifice. The Guardian's trials had not only tested her but had revealed the depths of her own spirit, preparing her for the greater challenges that lay ahead. And though the road was still uncertain, Seraphine felt a newfound clarity and resolve, knowing that she was no longer just a lost princess but a warrior, ready to face whatever fate had in store. With each challenge, Seraphine felt a growing sense of clarity. The trial was not just a test of her abilities, but a lesson in understanding her true purpose. As she navigated the Guardian's labyrinth of questions, she realized that her journey was leading her to a choice that might pit her against her own father. She would have to decide whether to reclaim her kingdom and reignite the magic that flowed in her blood, or to let it fade away and allow Valoria to crumble into obscurity. When she finally emerged victorious from the trial, the Guardian nodded in approval. You have proven your strength, Seraphine. The path ahead will be fraught with danger, but you have the resolve to face it. As they continued their journey, Seraphine felt a renewed sense of determination, but that resolve was soon tested by an encounter with a being far more sinister. Lurking in the shadows of the forest was a fae of the Unseelie Court, a creature of dark beauty and cruel intent. The fae's eyes gleamed with malice, its form shifting between elegance and terror as it stepped into Seraphine's path. The Unseelie fae struck with a speed that defied reason, capturing Seraphine in a whirlwind of dark magic. Zephyr, caught off guard, watched in horror as the fae spirited her away to a hidden lair behind a waterfall. There, in the dim, dripping cavern, the fae's voice was a silken whisper as it entered Seraphine's mind, planting seeds of doubt and fear. It twisted her thoughts, urging her to abandon her quest, to side with her father, and to let the magic of the dragons die for the good of all. Zephyr, realizing Seraphine was missing, immediately went into action. His sharp senses scoured the forest, his heart pounding with dread. He puffed out a cloud of magical smoke that revealed a faint, glowing trail left by the fae's magic. Following it, he found the hidden waterfall and burst into the lair, just as the fae tried to seal its hold on Seraphine's mind. With a fierce beat of his wings, Zephyr sent the fae sprawling, its dark glamour shattered. The creature's attempts to escape were futile. Zephyr's powerful talons pinned it to the ground, and with a final decisive move, he ended the threat. As the fae's essence dissipated into the mist, Zephyr turned to Seraphine, who was slowly awakening from the dark enchantment. As Seraphine stumbled out of the waterfall spray, still disoriented, Zephyr's expression was one of grave concern. A partling Unseelie Court fae, he murmured, his voice filled with a mixture of dread and anger. Their presence here is a dire omen. These creatures don't act alone, they're part of something larger, more malevolent. If they've taken an interest in you, Seraphine, it means there are darker forces at play than we imagined. Seraphine felt a shiver run down her spine at Zephyr's words. The Unseelie Court was infamous for its cruelty and its cunning, and the fact that one of its kind had targeted her was deeply unsettling. Zephyr's eyes, normally so composed, were filled with an intensity that took Seraphine by surprise. We must be on our guard. The Fae's influence can be insidious, and the implications of their involvement in your quest could be far-reaching. As they pressed on, the weight of their journey grew heavier. Seraphine found herself at a crossroads, torn between the legacy of her bloodline and the unsettling possibility that the magic she sought to protect might be better left to fade. The words of the Fae lingered in her mind, like a shadow that refused to dissipate. Finally, after a tense silence, Seraphine spoke. "Zephyr, if the magic dies, if Valoria crumbles, what will happen to us? To the dragons?" Zephyr sighed, his gaze distant. "That is the question we all must face, isn't it? Whether to fight for a dying light or let it go out with dignity. But remember this, Seraphine magic has a way of finding a new form, even in death. And so do we." Seraphine nodded, though her heart was heavy with uncertainty. The path ahead was dark and fraught with peril, but she knew one thing for certain: she could not turn back now. She would face whatever trials came her way, even if it meant standing against her own father and the kingdom she had once called home. The dragon ruins loomed before them like a forgotten nightmare, a place where time had lost all meaning and sorrow lingered in every breath of the wind. Ancient stones, once part of majestic structures, now lay shattered and strewn across the ground, as if a great force had torn them asunder in a moment of rage. Vines, twisted and gnarled, crawled over the remains, their tendrils clinging to the ruins like the desperate hands of the past refusing to let go. The air was thick with the weight of ages, heavy with the remnants of a time long past, a time when dragons soared above these very stones, their power unmatched and their magic unbound. As Seraphine and Zephyr approached, an unnatural stillness settled over the land. The light of day, once warm and golden, dimmed, shrouded by an invisible force that seemed to drain the very essence of life from the world around them. Shadows stretched long and dark, as if the ruins themselves were reaching out to pull them into the abyss. Seraphine felt the chill of the place seep into her bones, a cold that went beyond mere temperature, sinking deep into her soul. Seraphine felt an unspoken question hanging between them, a question she could no longer keep at bay. "Zephyr," she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "why did my father seal away the magic of the dragons?" Zephyr, usually so unflappable, turned to her with a look of genuine confusion. His eyes, sharp and gleaming like gemstones, narrowed slightly as he considered her words. "Do not know," he admitted, his voice tinged with something that could almost be called fear. "I have always believed it was for the protection of Valoria, to keep the dragons from overpowering the realm. But now I am not so sure." Seraphine's heart tightened in her chest. "What was he keeping from me?" she murmured under her breath, her thoughts churning with unease. A sudden chilling thought struck her, and she found herself wondering, who was my mother really? The veil between the living world and the dragon spirits was but a thin, wavering breath here, and Seraphine could feel it, the presence of those who had come before, the spirits of the dragons trapped in this place, their agony pressing down on her with every step. The closer she came to the heart of the ruins, the stronger the sensation grew, until it was almost unbearable. It was as if the very air was alive with their pain, a silent scream that resonated in her mind, drowning out all other thoughts. And with each step, the suffering of the dragons grew more palpable, more unbearable. Seraphine could feel them trapped, suspended in the veil, their desperation pressing down on her like a physical weight. The air was thick with their agony, and it stole her breath, leaving her gasping under the oppressive force of the magic emanating from the altar. Amidst this desolation, the altar stood at the center, a dark monolith of power and despair. It was here that the chains lay, binding the spirits of the dragons, their magic, their very essence, to this forsaken place. The chains themselves were a cruel mockery of freedom, forged from a dark, ancient metal that seemed to drink in the light, their surface etched with runes of binding and suppression. But it was not the runes that drew Seraphine's gaze, it was the crest, her father's crest, the royal emblem of Valoria, branded into the chains as a final act of dominance. The sight of it turned her blood to ice. And then she saw it, etched into the very chains that bound the dragon's spirits, a crest, unmistakable and cruel in its familiarity. The royal crest of Valoria, her father's crest. It was he who had sealed their magic, he who had forged these chains. The realization struck her like a blow, shattering any last remnant of doubt. Rage blossomed within her, a fury so fierce it threatened to consume her whole. How could her father have done this? The dragons, creatures of immense power and majesty, reduced to this bound, suffocating, dying. She could not stand for it. She would not stand for it. Her decision was made in that moment, forged in the fires of her anger and her newfound resolve. She would break the chains, no matter the cost. She would restore the dragons' magic, their freedom. But as she neared the altar, a barrier, an invisible dome of magic hummed into existence, shimmering faintly in the air. Zephyr, despite all his strength and power, could not enter. His form flickered as he tried, repelled by the runes that glowed ominously at 3 points around the altar. Determined, Seraphine approached the nearest rune, intent on smashing it. She grabbed a rock and raised it high, but just as she was about to strike, a glint of metal caught her eye. She dodged, barely escaping the deadly arc of a sword, a blackguard's sword. The undead knight, clad in rusted armor and wreathed in a dark, malevolent aura, loomed over her, its eyes hollow and filled with an unnatural hunger. An undead blackguard in this place? Seraphine's mind raced with terror. What kind of dark magic was this? Her thoughts whirled. Had her father, the king of Valoria, truly dealt with such evil forces? The implications were horrifying, but she had no time to dwell on them. She had to be quick, clever. She positioned herself in front of the rune, waiting for the blackguard to strike. At the last possible moment she dodged, and the knight's sword came crashing down, shattering the rune into pieces. The dome flickered, its power weakening. Zephyr, seizing the opportunity, unleashed a blast of fiery breath that sent the blackguard flying. Seraphine wasted no time. She snatched the fallen knight's sword and dashed to the next rune, smashing it with a single powerful blow. The dome collapsed, its magic dissipating into the air. But just as she thought she had won, her heart froze in her chest. Wraiths began to emerge from the shadows, their twisted, ethereal forms gliding toward her with a hunger that chilled her to the bone. Another blackguard appeared, its sword gleaming with dark intent. Desperate, Seraphine raced to the altar, the sword clutched tightly in her hands. She brought it down on the chains that bound the dragon's spirits, but the blade shattered on impact, the chains unyielding. Zephyr landed beside her, but the magic of the chains weakened him, sapping his strength. Still, he fought valiantly, his breath scorching the wraiths, reducing them to ash. But then, a new terror emerged from the darkness, a creature unlike any she had ever seen. The Echinman was a monstrous, fearsome beast, its body covered in jagged obsidian-like scales that jutted out in all directions, each one sharp enough to slice through stone. Its eyes were pools of blackness, voids that seemed to draw in all light and hope. Spines protruded from its back, each one tipped with a deadly toxin that dripped like venom. It moved with a speed and grace that belied its size, its claws rending the earth as it charged. Zephyr roared, meeting the creature head-on. Their clash was a brutal symphony of violence, a battle that shook the very ground beneath them. Zephyr's claws tore through the Echinaman's armored hide, but the creature was relentless, its spines lashing out with deadly precision. It lunged, driving Zephyr back, its jaws snapping inches from his throat. But Zephyr was a dragon of ancient might, and he fought with a ferocity born of desperation. With a mighty swing of his tail, he struck the Echinum across the face, sending it reeling. The two titans clashed again, their roars echoing through the ruins, a battle of fire and shadow, strength against darkness. As Seraphine stood amidst the ruins, her breath ragged and shallow, she felt the wraiths closing in, their icy claws raking across her skin. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the weight of the dark magic pressing down on her, suffocating, relentless. Zephyr's roar of defiance echoed in her ears, a distant sound almost drowned out by the pounding of her own heart. But then, in the heart of that terror, something within her began to stir, a flicker of warmth, a pulse of light buried deep in the core of her being. It was faint at first, a whisper, a memory of power long forgotten. But it grew, fed by her desperation, by her rage, by the cries of the dragons that resonated through the ruins. She felt it rising, a tide of ancient magic coiled and waiting within her, yearning to be unleashed. Her vision blurred, the world around her slowing to a crawl. Every heartbeat was a thunderous drum in her ears, every breath a struggle against the crushing weight of the dark forces that surrounded her. But as the power surged within her, the fear began to recede, replaced by something else, something fierce, primal and unstoppable. The warmth in her chest flared into a searing heat, spreading through her veins like wildfire. It was as if her very blood had turned to liquid flame, coursing through her body with a force that was both excruciating and exhilarating. The pain was intense, almost unbearable, yet it brought with it a clarity, a sharpness of thought and purpose she had never known. The power within her was not just magic, it was life, raw and untamed, the very essence of the dragons themselves. Her skin tingled, crackling with energy, as if the air around her was alive with electricity. She could feel the power coiling around her, a serpent of light and heat, its scales glittering with 1,000 colors. It was beautiful, terrible, a force of nature that could not be contained, and she was its vessel. As the power built to a crescendo, Seraphine closed her eyes, surrendering to it. The world slowed to a crawl, each second stretching into eternity. She could feel the dragon's spirits merging with her own, their ancient wills intertwining with hers, lending her their strength, their fury, their desire for freedom. And then, with a cry that tore from the depths of her soul, she unleashed it. The power erupted from her in a blinding flash of light, a wave of pure, incandescent energy that surged outward in every direction. It moved through her, out of her, and into the world, its intensity so great it felt as though her very soul was being ripped apart and remade in the same instant. The chains binding the dragon's spirits shattered under the force of it, disintegrating into dust that glittered like stardust before being swept away by the power of her will. The wraiths, dark and twisted, were caught in the blast. They twisted and writhed, their forms distorting as the light consumed them, their screams of rage and pain swallowed by the brilliance of Seraphine's magic. They dissolved into nothingness, their shadows erased from existence by the purifying light that burned through the darkness. The power flowed through her like a river of molten gold, flooding her senses with its intensity. She could feel every tendril of magic as it surged from her chest, through her arms, and out into the world, each pulse like a heartbeat, each wave like the rhythm of the earth itself. It was as if she had become one with the very essence of creation, her body a conduit for the ancient, unstoppable force of life and magic. The chains that had bound the dragons, forged in cruelty and darkness, crumbled to ash in the face of her power. The runes that had held Zephyr at bay flared briefly before being snuffed out, their malevolent light extinguished. The altar, the very heart of the dark magic that had enslaved the dragons, was consumed in a blaze of brilliant light, its malevolent presence burned away by the force of Seraphine's will. The ruins were engulfed in a blinding light, the dragon's spirits released, their voices a triumphant chorus that echoed through the night. The Echinamon, wounded and weakened, recoiled from the light, and with one final, desperate effort, Zephyr drove it back, his claws rending its flesh, until it fell, defeated. Time seemed to slow as the energy finally began to ebb, leaving her body in a cascade of shimmering light that drifted into the air like glowing embers. The ruins were illuminated, bathed in the afterglow of the immense power that had surged through her, and as the last of the light left her, she felt an overwhelming sense of release, as though a great burden had been lifted from her soul. She collapsed to her knees, her strength spent, but her heart was light, her spirit unburdened. The ruins around her were quiet now, the darkness banished, the air clear and still. The chains were gone, the dragons were free, and the crest of her father's reign had been broken, its power shattered by her resolve. Seraphine knew that she had done something extraordinary, something that would change the course of history. And as she knelt there, surrounded by the remnants of the magic she had unleashed, she understood that she had not just broken the chains of the dragons, she had broken the chains of her own destiny. Seraphine's breath came in ragged gasps as she knelt amidst the ruins, the last vestiges of power ebbing away from her like the receding tide. The world around her was eerily quiet, as if the earth itself held its breath in the aftermath of the magic she had unleashed. The air, once heavy with the stench of decay and dark magic, was now cool and clean, a gentle breeze washing over her, soothing her battered spirit. Slowly, Seraphine rose to her feet, her legs trembling beneath her. The weight of the battle still lingered in her bones, but she felt lighter, unburdened by the darkness that had once pressed down on her. The ruins, once a place of shadows and suffering, were now bathed in the soft light of a world reborn. She gazed upon Zephyr, the ancient dragon who had been both her guide and her guardian, his scales dulled by age and his wings hung limply at his sides. His age was painfully apparent. The once mighty dragon, who had soared through the skies with the strength of 1,000 storms, was now worn and weary, the toll of countless battles etched into his every movement, but his spirit undimmed. The wounds of their final struggle still marked his body, but there was a peace in his eyes that she had never seen before, a deep, abiding acceptance that spoke of lives lived and battles fought long before she had ever drawn breath. But as Seraphine approached, she saw the glimmer of life still burning in his ancient eyes. He looked up at her. So that their eyes met, there was something in his gaze, an understanding that needed no words, and a low rumble of contentment emanating from deep within his chest as she knelt beside him and wrapped her arms around his thick neck. As Seraphine embraced him, she felt the warmth of his ancient heart, the steady rhythm that spoke of lives intertwined, destinies shared. She pressed her cheek against his cool scales, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his presence comforting her in a way that words could not. They had both survived, and they had both won a victory that went far beyond the physical. As she pulled back from the embrace, something caught her eye, a glint of something unnatural, something that did not belong in the serenity of this moment. She turned, her eyes narrowing as she caught sight of the fallen Ekinman. Its twisted body sprawled across the ground like a grotesque shadow. The creature's maw hung open in a final silent scream, its long, jagged tongue lolling from between its fanged jaws. But it wasn't the creature's horrific visage that made Seraphine's blood run cold, it was what was branded on its tongue. The mark was unmistakable, a sigil of dark magic seared into the very flesh of the beast, a warlock's crest. Seraphine recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest as the full implications of what she was seeing settled over her like a shroud. She turned to Zephyr, who had risen to his feet, his old eyes widening in shock as he too saw the brand. The warlock's crest gleamed in the fading light, a symbol of control, of domination, of something far more sinister than either of them had anticipated. This cannot be, Zephyr murmured, his voice a deep, rumbling growl of disbelief. A warlock here, controlling such a beast. Seraphine could only nod. her thoughts racing as she tried to piece together the puzzle that had been laid before them. The dark forces they had faced were not just the remnants of her father's cruelty, there was something else, something darker and more malevolent at work. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, a cold dread seeping into her bones. But for now the dragons were free. She turned her gaze to the sky, where in the distance she could see them great, magnificent creatures, their scales shimmering in the sunlight as they soared through the heavens. The dragons, whose spirits had been chained and suffocated for so long, were now a living testament to the power of magic unbound, their roars echoing across the land like a psalm of triumph. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips as she watched them, her heart swelling with a sense of pride and joy she had not felt in a long time. Zephyr, too, lifted his weary body into the air, his wings catching the wind as he joined his kin in the sky. Seraphine chuckled softly as she watched him, his old spirit rejuvenated as he flew with the reckless abandon of a hatchling tasting flight for the first time. There was a beauty in it, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy that filled the sky with light and life. In the end, Seraphine's journey through the haunted ruins and enchanted forests led her to a revelation that transcended her personal quest. She had set out to free the dragons, to right the wrongs of her father's reign, but she had gained something far greater, a deeper understanding of the legacy the dragons carried, a legacy that went beyond power and magic. It was a legacy of courage, of wisdom, and of an unbreakable bond between past and future, between what was and what could be. As she stood there, watching the dragons reclaim the skies, Seraphine knew that her journey was far from over. There were still questions unanswered, dangers lurking in the shadows, but for now, she allowed herself to revel in the victory they had won. A victory that was as much a beginning as it was an end. But as Seraphine stood there, watching the dragons reclaim their rightful place in the skies, a shadow of doubt crept into her heart. She had made her choice, aligned herself with the ancient beings of magic and fire, but now, in the quiet aftermath of battle, she wondered if it had been the right one. Zephyr's words echoed in her mind, heavy with the weight of ancient wisdom. The dragons and magical beings alike have accepted their fate. We have lived our time. The magic is fading, and soon we will be gone from this realm. But humans cannot seem to understand this. Seraphine's brow furrowed as she considered the implications of what she had done. Had she merely delayed the inevitable? The dragons, powerful and magnificent as they were, had been at peace with their impending extinction. They had accepted the fading of their magic as a natural course, a gentle departure from a world that no longer needed them. But in her desperation, in her fury at the injustice of their suffering, she had forced them back into the world of men, a world that had grown colder, more cruel, a world that did not tolerate anything that threatened its fragile balance of power. Would this act of defiance only sow the seeds of further conflict? Would the dragons, once revered and feared, now become the targets of human ambition and greed? She imagined the chaos that might ensue, the bloodshed, the wars that could erupt as humans sought to either control or destroy the creatures they had once worshipped. Seraphine could see it clearly in her mind's eye, the dragon eggs crushed beneath iron boots, the hatchlings hunted before they could even spread their wings, the ancient spirits of the dragons, those she had felt so keenly in the forest, trapped forever in a limbo between life and death, their legacy twisted by the relentless will of mankind. Her heart ached with the weight of these thoughts. Had she merely prolonged their suffering, delaying the peace that was meant to come to them naturally? Would they fade away in their own time, as Zephyr had said, or would they be destroyed by the very beings she had sought to protect? And the unseelie court fae, what had they been trying to accomplish? Who did they serve, if not themselves? Seraphine could not shake the feeling that she was a pawn in a much larger game, a game whose rules she did not yet fully understand. Was this truly fate, as she had been led to believe, or was there a more sinister hand guiding her steps? These questions churned within her, like a storm brewing on the horizon, but she knew that for now they would have to wait. The battle was over, but her journey was far from complete. The kingdom of Valoria awaited her, a land that had been taken from her by the very forces she now questioned. She would return, she would reclaim her throne, and perhaps, in time, the answers she sought would reveal themselves. But as she turned her back on the dragon ruins, leaving behind the echoes of her doubts, Seraphine looked out over the vast landscape of her kingdom, a kingdom she had fought to reclaim. She knew that they would have to wait. The road ahead was long, and the answers, if they existed, would be found in time. For now she had chosen her path, and she would walk it, step by step, with the courage of the dragons and the wisdom of the ages guiding her. In the twilight of their journey, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon and the first stars began to shimmer in the darkening sky, Seraphine and Zephyr stood on the edge of a world both familiar and forever changed. The haunted ruins lay behind them, their silent echoes now quieted, and the enchanted forests whispered secrets only to the wind. The battle that had raged within and around them had ended, but the war within Seraphine's heart had only begun to cool. She understood now, standing on the precipice of her old life and the new one that awaited her. The dragons in their majesty had left behind more than memories or legends. They had left a mark on the world that would outlast stone, outlast flesh. It was a legacy of resilience, of sacrifice, and of a love so deep it defied the very fabric of reality. Seraphine breathed deeply, the cool air filling her lungs, and as the stars began to wake, she knew that whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it. And so, dear dreamers and wanderers, as the final whispers of our tale fade into the tranquil night, I hope you found a moment of calm amidst the echoes of dragon legends and enchanted realms. Princess Seraphine's journey through the ghostly ruins and spectral forests has come to a close, leaving behind a tapestry of haunting beauty and whimsical adventure. As you drift back from the land of Valoria, may the serene memories of our story linger like a gentle dream. Let the echoes of dragon roars and the soft murmur of enchanted woods accompany you into a restful night, wrapping you in their soothing embrace. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the shadowed and serene. I'm Mooncat, and I look forward to welcoming you back for more tales that weave magic and relaxation together. Until then, let the whispers of the dragons and the tranquility of the night guide you to peaceful slumber.